Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Oh, Jabba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Oh, Jabba.
So, there's a part of me that feels like I should do something special because it's episode number 100 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Jon Justice. But I'm not going to do anything special for the for the podcast. I've been doing radio for 21 years, and let me say up front, thank you to everybody who's emailed the show as of late, Brittany, Brianna. Thanks to everybody who's commented on YouTube over the past few shows. It's been really cool. I've been doing the podcast now for, well, we're on episode number 100, and like all the podcasts that I do, I really just do it for my own enjoyment. I mean, I think for those of us that do podcasts, there's people that do it because they're trying to make money. Everybody kind of has different agendas. And mine is purely from a love of Star Wars. When The Force Awakens was announced, I got so excited as a lifelong fan that I decided at one point before The Force Awakens was released to do a podcast. And like I said, for those that don't know, I'm a full-time radio talk show host. Don't hold that against me. And actually had a comment from somebody on YouTube who had asked if I did any vocal work, if I ever thought about doing voiceovers and things like that. I let him know. I said, well, actually, I'm a radio talk show host. And just really kind words, and it's been great. But I've been doing this now for a couple of years, and I get a decent amount of hits, and certainly some podcasts get more hits than others, and it never ceases to amaze me how certain shows just click. And the past two shows talking about the idea of Reylo, what's going to become of these two characters, it's clear that I struck a chord with a lot of people. And it's just been fun. It's been really cool to see when people go and connect with the show. When I do my weekly show here in Minneapolis, it's Justice and Drew on Twin Cities News Talk here with iHeartMedia. We get ratings and we get phone calls and we can see what our podcast hits are. But I still get a thrill when I know that the show is reaching a lot of people and that people are really enjoying it. And that's what this show has always been about for me. It's been just about a fan who sits down for 45 minutes, hopefully a week, if I can be consistent, and just talks about his love of Star Wars. And my hope was that whoever listened would just enjoy listening as much as I enjoy doing it. And again, because of the past few episodes and the number of downloads that the show's received, it's been really cool. And I'm sure that's going to ebb and flow. I was doing a Depeche Mode podcast for a while because I'm a massive Depeche Mode fan, and I started a separate project outside of radio or podcast content generation, which I'm not ready to talk about yet, but that's taken up some of my time. So I had to trim back the other podcasts that I do. I do a NASCAR one too. I've trimmed those back, and I've just strictly been sticking with the Star Wars one over the course of the past 6 months. So I just wanted to express a quick thanks to you who listen. And for those that have been checking the show out on YouTube, I want to remind everybody you can listen to it on Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, and of course iTunes as well. And you can always drop me an email either talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at Jon Justice, Facebook as well, or the people that have been commenting on YouTube. So that's just like I said, I just want to do a quick word of thanks.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
All right, on the show this week, not a ton of news to get to. We do have a couple of items in the form of some short TV spots that have dropped. I didn't pull the audio. There are 15-second TV spots, and the audio is really abrupt and disjointed. There's one spot in particular that I thought was really revealing, and it's one of the few times in the trailer material, teaser material, that we've actually kind of got almost a bit of a story thread of a scene, and we hadn't gotten that yet, and I thought it was interesting and spoke a lot about what's going to happen potentially between Rey and Luke. We'll talk about that. I do want to talk about Rian Johnson. I have some further thoughts on this new trilogy that he's going to be making in the years to come that I spent quite a bit of time on last week's show, episode 99, talking about. There's a new article out titled The Dark Side Awaits, and I'm actually looking at it, oddly enough, on Reddit right now. This was out of Sci-Fi Now, printed this article, The Dark Side Awaits. And I've got some highlights from the article that I want to share with you, and we're going to talk a bit more about this idea of Reylo, Rey and Kylo, what their relationship is heading for, and the marketing continuing to lay out this roadmap in front of us, and what they're pointing to and what they're not talking about, and what those two things mean about one another. I continue my journey to The Last Jedi, watching the movies in order. So I watched Attack of the Clones last weekend. I want to talk a little bit about that, and that was a special watch, considering that that's the middle of that trilogy, and we're in the middle of the sequel trilogy. And I think there are some parallels that we're gonna, and again, some threads, for lack of a better word, that we're gonna pull on a bit. So let me start here, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. I just want to make mention of Battlefront II really quick. I loved the original Battlefront, only because I'm a geek over the vehicles and fighter squadron in the original Battlefront. And I could play that game, for hours on end, just doing the fighter squadron portion of Battlefront. I got Battlefront 2 yesterday and finally had some time after like a 4-hour download to the Xbox One. Finally had some time this morning this afternoon to spend some time with it, and a much different game. And it's always a process that I go through. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, so don't go anywhere. It's always a process that I go through with when I get a new game, especially if it's a sequel to another game. Mentally, I have this idea that the game is going to be sort of a ramped up version, a better, shinier new version than the game I was playing, and it takes me a while to kind of work through that. Okay, no, this is a completely different type of gameplay than what we were used to before. So spent a couple hours playing it today, playing a little bit of the ground battle stuff. I'm not a huge first person shooter unless I'm playing an actual campaign, a storyline. Like I said, I like to fly the ships around. The fighter assault portion of Battlefront 2 is much different, and I haven't quite wrapped my head around it yet. I like the older Battlefront better, but I think it's mostly because I'm not quite used to this new Battlefront. So I'm going to have to, take some more time, spend some more time with it. The one thing I wanted to mention, and I'm only through the first checkpoint of it, and I'm about halfway through the Battlefront 2 book, Inferno Squad, but I started the campaign for Battlefront 2. And like I said, I'm only through the first checkpoint. It is awesome. I loved Lost Stars, loved that book. I'm a romantic at heart. I'm a sucker for romance. My wife has read all the Twilight books, and I actually like New Moon quite a bit. I think it's the best of all the movies, but that's just me. I've always been a romantic that way. And Lost Stars was my jam I loved that book. And apart from the actual storyline of the characters in the book, I love how they're layering some of these stories on top of existing material and how it runs through the timeline that we're all so used to. And Battlefront II, the campaign in the game, and the story of Iden Versio and Inferno Squad is no different. It is so neat and just so rad to see a different perspective of the Battle of Endor, and knowing that you're in a campaign that's taking place during events of these movies that we all love so much. And so I'm sure I'll have further things to say about it, but I just wanted to mention that I think it's really, I really, really enjoyed what I've played so far. And again, I've only played for just a little bit.
Let the past die. Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
That, by the way, and I mentioned this in a previous episode, the music is so deceiving on that clip from Kylo Ren there. I'm convinced he's talking to Rey, and it's more of a conversational, emotional situation than it is, something like, let the past die, kill it if you have to. He sounds way too relaxed in that clip. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about Rian Johnson and what Rian Johnson is doing. I heard a really interesting theory from Jason Ward on MakingStarWars.net and the podcast this week. And I tend to agree. It falls in line quite a bit with what I discussed last week about this new trilogy. And for one, he raised a really interesting point in that the quote coming from the press release about Rian Johnson and this new trilogy, and saying that it's going to be an unexplored part of Star Wars lore. He makes an interesting point that's kind of a questionable statement. What does that actually mean, an unexplored part of lore? And I broke it down last week a bit, and he expanded on it further, and I tend to agree with him in that the unexplored part of lore really is probably just them talking about the feature films. An unexplored part of the galaxy. Because if you begin to kind of break down what that means, I sincerely doubt that Rian Johnson is going to create a trilogy that isn't connected to what we know already, right? That just doesn't seem logical to me. He went on to say that apparently Rian Johnson was really heavily involved in crafting the lore. He was working a lot with the lore of Star Wars in making The Last Jedi. And we know from the trailers, we have the tree, we have the books, we have the balance. That's the first time that we've actually seen books in any of the Star Wars movies. And so that kind of gives you a dated feel. Everything else that we've seen has been more on a technical level. But those were actual physical books. So, he raised the idea that, he's doing The Last Jedi. What if he went back and did the first Jedi? The first Jedi that ever existed, how they even came into being. And the point that he was making was you could even go further back than the Old Republic, obviously. The Sith have been extinct for a millennia. They've been extinct for 1,000 years. Yoda had been around for 900 years. You'd have to go way, way, way back to even go to the beginning of when the Jedi started. And how do you get people excited about a film that doesn't have something that they can immediately go, oh, wow. And to me, it really has to go back to, you have to go back to do that. And if Rian Johnson was working on the lore of Star Wars and making The Last Jedi, there's this idea that maybe they did offer him the opportunity to do Episode 9. And maybe Rian Johnson said, yeah, I could, but what if I did this? I posed the idea last week that maybe they brought him into a room and laid out all these ideas that they had. And this could potentially be on the table of ideas, right? The table of options. But maybe he went and said, hey, I could do 9, but I have this other idea for this thing over here. What if I go and do this thing over here instead? And they all went, oh, that's a really good idea. And then you hand it off to J.J. Abrams. Now, getting back to the idea of Rey and Kylo and what many of you, what you believe, what I believe, potentially, about where those two characters are going. And I have further information on that. Again, it makes sense to me that J.J. Abrams would be the one to take over on Episode 9. It also makes sense that they would be having some issues with Colin Trevorrow if the new mythology that they bring up in The Last Jedi was one where it needed to be handled with really delicate hands. The other thing I wanted to mention, apart from that, because I do think that Rian Johnson's going to go back. It makes way more sense to me for Rian Johnson to craft some new mythology going back pre-Jedi or Old Republic, because that hasn't been explored in the movies. It makes way more sense for me for him to go and do that than it does for him to go forward or to do some kind of offshoot that runs parallel, a trilogy that runs parallel with any of the timelines that we're used to. Star Wars and the movies going forward, they're going to benefit from having a common thread. I don't think that Disney's going to want to keep jumping around in the timeline, and we've done that. We've done that now because we've gone one step forward with The Force Awakens, and now we're going another step forward with The Last Jedi. But we've also jumped back with Rogue One. We're jumping back further and then going on top of Rogue One. If the timeline from what we've been told that the Han Solo movie stretches for 7 years, we've done the Clone Wars to death. We don't need to do that anymore. We've continued to dance in this place pre A New Hope with Rebels. They need to go and establish another timeline to be able to farm from and make movies going forward. And like I said last week, I do think that this is going to be somewhat in replacing of some of the spin-off movies, and that they're going to have Rian Johnson create this new trilogy to give us a break from the saga films, and then we're going to get the saga films again. And then if what Rian Johnson created was really good, and it was pre-Old Republic, that it established the Old Republic, being formed, say, at the end, then you can go into the Old Republic stories. And now you've got a whole timeline worth of 1,000 years to play with leading into The Phantom Menace. To me, that makes the most sense. The one other point that I wanted to bring up, and what has me so very excited about Rian Johnson, I was watching Empire of Dreams, the 2.5-hour documentary that was on the DVD release, and I got my Blu-rays, and I kept that disc from the DVDs that I had, and I love that documentary. It's absolutely fantastic. It's my favorite Star Wars documentary. And next, by the way, the next one down from that would be the beginning, the story of the Phantom Menace being made. I love that's a great one too. But I'm watching this, and I'm watching the history of George Lucas once again. And I've seen that documentary a dozen times, and I saw these parallels with George Lucas. I saw these parallels with George Lucas and what Rian Johnson is doing, and I just immediately got this vibe that Rian Johnson is our new George Lucas. And the Star Wars franchise needs a person like that. We've got our Dave Filoni's, who's in charge of Rebels and did Clone Wars, but they haven't quite graduated towards feature films yet. I wouldn't be surprised if Dave Filoni ended up being the showrunner for whatever the live-action TV show is going to be. And I have no clue on that, by the way. That, to me, I'm just setting out there. I was going to spend some time on the podcast this week talking about it, but I have no idea what they're going to do for that. And quite honestly, I am more than willing to just let them announce it and see what it is. I mean, I'm a movie guy. I like watching. I love Rebels. I love the Clone Wars, but those were always shows that I can just wait to come to me. I have no idea what I would even want from a TV show at this point in time. But I do think that Rian Johnson got the mythology. And I know some people have kind of pushed back on this idea, but I am convinced that they've given him this new trilogy because of what he's done with The Last Jedi, and that The Last Jedi is truly special, and that he did something very similar to what Irving Kershner did with The Empire Strikes Back, and he really zeroed in and tapped in to these characters in a way that wasn't done in the original movie, and really wasn't taken advantage of, in my opinion, to its fullest in Return of the Jedi. That's why I like J.J. Abrams coming in with this final film, because I think that when it comes to relationships and dealing with individuals on a one-on-one basis and those male-female relationships, J.J. Abrams does a very, very good job. One of my favorite scenes from Super 8, and it's probably one of my favorite, apart from any the scenes inside of Star Wars, it's probably one of my favorite movie scenes of the past, 10, I guess it's been out for about 10 years now. Probably, maybe less. But it's the scene where Dakota Fanning, right? Or is that Ellie Fanning? One of the Fannings. She climbs in the window of the kid's room, and they have that conversation back and forth before the projector starts playing and showing footage of her, of his mom that he was watching, and she tells the story of when her dad got drunk and went to work, and she's having, it's framed with the two of them in profile, and she goes, it feels like I don't know you hardly at all, but it feels like I've known you forever when I'm talking to you. Have you ever felt that before? And he says, no, totally. I'm shocked that we're having this conversation right now. And it's just these two young, preteens, teens, having this incredibly important conversation where they're sort of learning about each other and both realizing that they're expressing how they have feelings for one another at such a young age. And there's just such an amazing innocence to it. And it was so spot on in reality. If Rian Johnson does what I think he's going to do with Kylo Ren and with Rey in this movie, and I'm getting ahead of myself in the podcast, because I don't necessarily think that we're going to get any kind of, and we've been told that we're not going to have any kind of romance in this film. And I'm not even 100% sure if Rey and Kylo will ever reach that particular level. But I do believe that they're going to, together through their own challenges, have their own connection. And I'm really excited about having J.J. Abrams take care of that. But I believe that Rian Johnson has done something really special with The Last Jedi, and they realized that the Star Wars franchise needs a visionary. The Star Wars franchise needs another George Lucas. We have the story group, but sometimes it just takes a person who just sort of lands there and gets it. And George was that guy. And I loved the prequels. Once again, watching Attack of the Clones, kind of like when I watched The Phantom Menace, when I watched it last weekend, it was one of the most enjoyable experiences that I had watching that movie, just sitting down and watching it and taking it in and putting aside any issues that I had with it and just letting the story unfold and seeing this relationship and understanding what George was trying to do with Anakin and seeing what a juvenile he was and how foolish she was. And yeah, that relationship was rushed. And yeah, some of the dialogue gets clunky and the Meadow scene's a little bit ridiculous. But you know what? Love is kind of ridiculous. I really just absolutely enjoyed that. And Rian Johnson gets those movies too. Rian Johnson has said that he likes the prequels. And I think that we haven't seen a lot of the other footage of the movie from particular locations, especially Canto Bight, the casino plan. And I think the part of that is they're holding it back. They may be doing it consciously, because I'm not one to think that they're hiding the prequels or trying to push them aside, but they're definitely trying to lay out a very particular film and are willing to let this whole other part of the movie sort of expose itself, at least so far, when we actually go and see the film. And I think that portion of the film is probably the one that's most prequel-esque. So My guess is that Rian Johnson, and this is the best news ever, is that Rian Johnson is going to be attached to Lucasfilm for a very, very long time. And that he is going to be a core element in the storytelling of these movies. And that the future and this future trilogy under Rian Johnson is going to be something very unique and very special, and probably something that Disney didn't realize that they were going to be able to tap into. I imagine that they hired Rian Johnson to do The Last Jedi, and it was only after they got done with it that they went, whoa, this guy knows what he's doing and has done something really unique and special. And for the sake of the future of the franchise, we really need to hang on to him.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So before I get to this article, because then we're going to talk a little Attack of the Clones again, and some parallels that I think we may get with The Last Jedi, and an idea of where the balance is coming from and where the Force is going. I read something on a thread, and it really stuck with me. One of the TV spots expanded on the footage that we've seen of Rey on Octo, swirling the lightsaber and stopping it before it hits the rock. I had speculated that she had done that with the lightsaber a bunch, and then she finally got it right, because the rock looks chipped away, okay? The new trailer shows her in the same spot, training, but she's got her staff. And she's twirling her staff much in the same way that she's been twirling the lightsaber, right to the same spot on the rock. Except this time in the trailer, you see her twirling her staff, and she does the rock, and then the trailer cuts to a shot of her looking at her handbag, and the lightsaber's in it. So then she pulls out the lightsaber, turns it on, does the move again, and doesn't hit the rock. There's also a secondary trailer where she's actually spinning the lightsaber and she's smiling. Okay, let me give you one more nugget, and then I'm going to lay out what I think potentially is happening here. There is a brand new piece of artwork. It is the AMC poster for the film, and it looks spectacular. I almost wish that it was the official poster. I actually like it better. I love the official poster. I love this white and red and black motif they have going on for this film. I absolutely love it. This poster, though, is really, really cool. Very much in a Drew Struzan type fashion artwork. Just looks amazing. And my apologies, the guy that actually did the artwork tweeted it out after AMC tweeted out and said it was a privilege and an honor to make the poster. But on the poster, really teeny tiny, down on the poster, there is a silhouette of Rey falling backwards with the staff, okay? And Luke is standing there holding a stick, okay? I assume it's his. He's got his prod. We've seen his cattle prod in pictures, and then some of the Funko Pops got more of a constructed staff. More than it is his cattle prod. So he's probably using that, because if he was using a lightsaber, he'd slice right through that staff. But she's falling backwards on the rock, okay? In the full trailer, when Luke does this line, right before he does this line, they're on the rock, and she's got her eyes closed, and the rocks they're floating up, right? And she closes her eyes.
I've seen this raw strength only once before.
The ground cracks, right?
It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
Okay. There's a shot in the trailer of Rey on the backside of that rock, and she's kind of clinging to it, right? And she's staring, looking all distressed. Okay. Here's my deduction, all right? Here's my guess. My guess is that for whatever reason, she ends up there on Octo. She hands Luke the lightsaber, and we've been told in many different sources and all been speculating that Luke's like, man, my name's Paul, this is between y'all. Probably based off of what happened at the Jedi Temple and Kylo Ren. Okay, he doesn't want to get involved in this nonsense, which probably puts away the idea that she's his daughter. Okay, but we'll talk about that again in a moment, because it's weird how all the marketing isn't teasing that at all. Like, that's not even an issue. Like, the marketing's not even talking about. The marketing is talking about all about Rey and Kylo. They're not even mentioning her parents. We know there's revelations. We know there's secrets about the past, but they're not even injecting that in any of the marketing, which could be a redirect, obviously. But, okay, so what I think happens is I think Luke reluctantly decides to train her, but doesn't want to do it with the lightsaber. If you watch Rebels, imagine the scene in last season when they decide they're going to go and train Sabine with the Darksaber, and they decide to practice with sticks instead. They didn't want to hurt anybody. So I think that Luke reluctantly decides to train her, and he's training her with the staff, and at some point he knocks her off that rock. And maybe she's not concentrating. Maybe she's not paying attention. I think we have a chance that we're getting a parallel from the middle trilogy and A New Hope of Yoda training him and, concentrate, and the rocks go falling. I think we're going to get an homage to that, where Rey's not following Luke's command. She's probably maybe telling him, I want to use the lightsaber, dude. He's like, no, you're not ready yet. They're sparring. She falls off the rock. Luke's like, man, I'm not dealing with it. So she continues to train on her own. And it's not until she finally gives up the staff, grabs the lightsaber, turns it on, that she's able to complete whatever move that is. Thus, we get the smiley twirl. All right, that's just pure speculation on my part. That's what the podcast is all about, right? Needless to say, I can't wait for this movie, because I just think it's going to be, awesome.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, let's talk a little Attack of the Clones. The first poster I got for that movie was a teaser poster. And I still have it. I don't have it framed, and I'm kicking myself for that. And it's in the closet. If I could look right through the wall to my left, I could see it rolled up in there. And it's a side by side. It's a shot side by side in profile of Anakin and Padme back to back, and it's got the lightsaber in it, the red lightsaber, and then it has the line, "A Jedi shall not know anger, nor fear, nor love." I don't want to tread over that ground again. If you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, I'm convinced that this is where the Jedi screwed up. I'm convinced that this is where the Jedi Order has got it all wrong. And that you can't go the way of the monk. You can't be an absolutist about it. Anakin kind of had it right. Compassion, which some would say is unconditional love. So you would say that we're required to love. And of course he's saying this to Padme because he doesn't want to give Padme the idea that it's not an opportunity for the two of them to hook up, because he's all, oh, you're Padme. And why wouldn't he? It's Natalie Portman, for crying out loud. So this is where I think it screwed up. The Jedi Order screwed up, and I think this is a part of what Luke ends up finding out in the Journal of the Wills and these old books from the Jedi Temple. And and this would be a very interesting to go back to Rian Johnson. That would be a very interesting thing to explore, to find out how to begin to lay out the story of how we started off with the first Jedi, and maybe they were on the right path, but how that ended up getting corrupted. And did the Sith play into that? Did the Sith cause the Jedi Order to go and abandon what their original roots were? That in the face of such horrible evil, they decided they needed to cleanse themselves even more to try to battle it. I mean, these themes reoccur all the time. If you pay attention to Green Lantern and sort of the, who gets the ring, and evil versus good and virtue, and I mean these are reoccurring themes. And I've never agreed with that. I think that it was this idea of sort of trying to keep Anakin. I mean, look, it's in Attack of the Clones. Their desire to keep it suppressed is what leads them down. They begin this relationship based off of a lie. Padme says as much in the movie. I can't live like that, can you? And only in the face of death in the form of being eaten by a Reek, a Nexu, and an Acklay, does Padme go, well, man, I think we're going to die. I need to let you know that, yeah, I kind of got the hots for you too. And, of course, they end up getting married, but it's all predicated on the lie because they have to lie to everybody around them, and that's no way to go and deal with it. And so because of his allegiance to the Jedi and being told that he's not supposed to love, he's not supposed to take a wife, it ends up putting a strain on the relationship, which is a part of the catalyst which, brings him to not wanting to lose Padme and having to hide. And if you've already started off lying, then it's easy to continue to lie, and we all know where it goes. I read on a message board something really interesting. And I actually think, you know what it was? It was somebody who had posted up a fake breakdown synopsis of The Last Jedi. And we know it's fake because it came from 4chan, but those are always fun fan fiction things to read, because that's what they are. But I always get a kick out of reading them. But some of the trailers refuted what this individual was saying happened in the movie. But they made a really, really interesting comment that I was like, you know what? That's where I think this is going. There is no light side, there is no dark side, there's only the Force. And that, to me, makes all the sense in the world. That there is no light side, there is no dark side, there's only the Force. You can't have one without the other, and you can't have the other without the one. And if you apply that to real-world terms, and I promise I'm not going to get political here, but so I'll try to keep it as base level as possible. This idea of creating like a utopian society, it just doesn't exist. You just can't. We can all strive to be better. It's great, but love isn't going to conquer all, because hate's always going to be there. And we're never going to have a utopia on Earth. It's just not going to happen. There'll always be somebody there that's got something they're dealing with in some way, shape, or form that's going to come and disrupt it. There was a TV show that was based off this, and it was canceled in a horrible disaster. So the Jedi trying to have this utopian idea of we're not going to know anger, we're not going to know fear, we're also going to you're not going to let love in either, because that's just going to corrupt. Nah, man, you have to be able to deal with your fear. You got to be able to deal with your anger. We get to this article from Sci-Fi Now. Rian Johnson says this. Doing that thing with my fingers. In this story, I think Rey and Kylo are almost like a dual protagonist. You identify with Rey, but you also identify with Kylo in a way that you never did with Vader. I know I do. Because if these movies are about adolescence, Kylo is that anger of adolescence and that rejection of the parents and wanting to screw your dad. And that's something that all of us can, to some degree, identify with. And the idea of there being a bad guy who you can identify with as much as you do the protagonist in some way, that's really interesting. If there is a possibility of a romance between Rey and Kylo, I think it's going to be very subtle. If anything, it'll happen within Episode 9, and I don't think that Kylo Ren makes it out of the trilogy. I still have a difficult time accepting a complete redemption of him in the wake of his murdering, the murdering of his father. There are ways to handle it, and they would have to handle it right to make it work, and I trust that they would handle it right and that they would make it work in handling it right. Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and say it's not a possibility. But I just get the feeling that he's going to have to create the ultimate sacrifice. And in doing so, he will be at a point where he will have already redeemed himself in the eyes of others, so that we feel the magnitude and the weight of whatever that sacrifice ends up being. But it is clear, right, that they are really making Kylo Ren and Rey the dual protagonists. I mean, he says as much in these movies. And I believe that these two are going to end up finding each other and being the thing that each other needs. I think Luke is going to be too reluctant and not going to fulfill the need of what Rey has, and I think Kylo Ren is going to come to the conclusion and the realization his dad was right and that Snoke was using him this whole time, and that he shouldn't have done what he did. Moving on, John Boyega says this. In war, you're not always going to be on the side of the good guys. If the good guys are getting killed off, I'd probably be like, you know what? I'm going to go get a job on the Empire base and just have a peaceful life. So the characters are challenged right now. They have to make these decisions as to where they stand. Even General Leia and Poe Dameron, if they're going to stand for the resistance, it has to be for a significant reason. Ryan came and made this really challenging, and that's what I really love. Okay, Daisy Ridley had this to say. It's funny how Adam Driver talks about it. He said it's not the difference between good and bad, it's the difference between good and right. Like, his character thinks what he's doing is right. He doesn't think that he's the big baddie. So the lines get blurred anyway. Good people make bad decisions. Bad people make good decisions. What Ryan has done is this wonderful thing of morally questioning people in a way that makes you see them in a more three-dimensional way, or just in a way that you haven't seen before. I think both of these individuals, and they keep laying out this, they're getting us ready for Rey and Kylo. They're getting us ready for Reylo in some way, shape, or form. And for those of us that are in the Reylo camp, I think that means different things for different people. We don't know where it's going. We just know that these two are going to end up in a relationship together in an emotional way at a bare minimum. But she's right. I've been through my own circumstances, even later in life, where I'll be in the middle of a thought process and a line of thinking, and not even realizing that I'm off in that line of thinking, and that my judgment's been really clouded. And then you end up with this moment of clarity, and sometimes it's not in a good way, an admission perhaps of some way, shape, or form, and you go, whoa. Oh my gosh, now that I say this thing out loud, I can't believe I was thinking that way. And it's only in hindsight, right? I mean, the saying, hindsight is 20/20, it's a saying for a reason. So Kylo Ren may be thinking all along, and they played on this in The Force Awakens and in some of the material for The Force Awakens. They played off that idea that Kylo Ren didn't think that he was the bad guy. He was confused. And one more quick point, and we'll wrap this up. And that is, in The Force Awakens, I always got such a weird vibe when Kylo Ren took his helmet off to Rey. And I don't know what the direction was and what J.J. Abrams told Daisy Ridley to say in that moment when Kylo Ren when you're hunted by a monster in a mask and he takes the helmet off, and it's not this deformed, grotesque individual. It's not this monster she calls him later. It's this good-looking guy with a lot of black hair. And her look isn't one of disgust, it's more of confusion in the moment. And when she calls him a monster at the end of The Force Awakens, right before he force throws her against that tree, I always got the sense that she was saying that in a way that was almost disappointing. Like, I don't know what's going on with you. You're a monster. She almost seems conflicted in saying it. Like, she doesn't want to call him a monster. Not that she's been able to see any good in him, but they had that connection when he got into her head. And it was something that obviously threw him off guard. And again, that could be my headcanon, my reading into what I see when I watch The Force Awakens, but that was always the vibe that I got. I hope you enjoyed episode number 100 as much as I enjoyed recording it. I'll be back again next week. I hope you have a fantastic week. I hope you're doing your own journey through The Force Awakens. You can always drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Leave a message on iTunes, on Facebook, or on Twitter @Jon Justice. And again, Podbean, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube. I guess that's it. Have yourself, again, a great week. Thank you so much for checking out the show. And may the Force be with you always.